I'm in Brooklyn, New York, as always. If you're watching and if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, we will see your comments. So let us know where you're from. Last month we had somebody from India watching at the same time as somebody from Australia, and I was like, that's pretty cool. That's some good time action happening there. So I'm in Brooklyn, New York. It's about to snow 6 to 10 inches. So that'll be interesting. I think I'll be stuck in the house for the next few days. And today I'm here with Merav Richter. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello. And I'm from Toronto. I'm representing Canada in the house. Right. Okay. Well,
it's Canadian on this show. So yeah.
Broken your Canadian cherry. First.
Exactly. First Canadian. How is everything over there? Are you quarantined? What's happening?
Yeah. So, where Canada was a lot more contained, like restrictive. And so, but people here have this mentality of like, yeah, well, yes, we're socially distancing. Yes, we're keeping quarantine. I mean, our numbers are relatively low, so that's kind of optimistic, but there are some, there are some people who are getting, catching symptoms of corona, and so the numbers are higher. So we're all contributing and all staying in our homes. But the incredible thing is, through the power of the future, because we live in the future, right? We have the power. I have the power to connect with people like you, and so being quarantined at home does not feel like I am, in a cave somewhere and reclusive. I actually have lights and sounds and people. And so, yes. So hello from Canada, all over the world. We're tuning in from Toronto and Brooklyn. How is that for the magic of technology?
Greetings
right? Quicker than a flight over.
What's funny, I saw this meme of the Jetsons. Do you know that cartoon?
Jetsons and Flintstones. It was like the past and the future.
Yeah, exactly. So it had all these pictures like of the boss yelling at the father through video chat, wife talking through video chat, and like several other video things. And they were like, look, the Jetsons were right. This is the future, right? So here we are,
Totally. Remember Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox?
Right.
And you went into the future and people were phoning in on a video.
Yep.
Phoning in from the TV. It's like.
Yeah. And it's crazy because that was always the thing. I mean, I remember there was a Friends episode. Monica dated a rich guy and he had a video phone. And it was like the craziest thing, and the phone would ring and they'd answer it and everybody would have to hide because she was like house sitting for him or something. Right. So now here we are. Right. Like it's 20. Thank goodness this didn't happen 20 years ago. We would all be lost.
The thing is, even in those comedic shows or the cartoons, like the hijinks that people were playing on those videos, it was always the worry. The video phone rang and I'm not dressed yet. And yet today we're on Zoom and we still haven't learned to get dressed.
Right.
We still haven't learned that the video is actually picking up, and turn your video off if you're not dressed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I was watching a Zoom comedy show a couple of weeks ago and every single comedian made the joke of like, am I wearing pants? No one knows.
Right. I'm not wearing pants.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't changed out of my pajamas in several days, so it's fine.
You know what? My day looks like yoga clothes, yoga, shower, yoga clothes. That's
right.
Same. One section of my closet. That's all I'm tapping into these days. And that's actually, so I was telling you, I chose this morning, especially for you, in an homage to my friend Marie. It was either going to be RBG, the notorious RBG t-shirt, or dun, 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 well-behaved women seldom make history. And this is the one that won for you.
Thank you for wearing that.
Yeah. A message in a t-shirt.
Didn't you have a shirt that says I'm speaking?
Yes. For all women who have been.
Yeah. Same. And I feel like I'm going to be saying I'm speaking for the rest of life now. It's wonderful. So thank you for these awesome t-shirts.
Yeah, just get it on your forehead, tattooed on your forehead.
Uh,
I'm spooking.
so, Merav, how do you take your coffee? You still
So
hear me?
I'll just let you know that I'm having a little bit of connection issues, so sometimes you will drop
Yeah.
off. So in the case that I'm looking a little confused, just know
Yeah.
that that's why. And I suspected that you were going to ask me that question.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, do I give you the trite answer that everybody else gives? Like, how I take my coffee, how I take my men, and especially with the whole, Starbucks ordering system with tall and grande and all that, right? Short, it, it, it could work, but that sounded a bit pedantic. And I like to think of myself as way more curious than that, and creative. So I decided that I would let you know actually how I take my coffee is how I like my sex. Starting early in the morning, going all through the day, even if that means it's going to keep me up at night.
Nice.
And that
That's
is in
the
fact
best I've ever had.
how
I'm
I
just gonna lay it out there like awesome.
that
So
is
are you
exactly how
drinking
I
coffee right now?
You know what? I will leave that for your imagination. I'm drinking it from my Phoenix mug, though,
Nice.
who, when she's in hot water or anything hot, she fires up.
She looks pretty fired up there. So there you go.
How's that for a metaphor for life?
Very nice. Lots of folks tune in later. Um, let us know how you take your coffee or whatever beverage it is that you start. We do have a lot of tea drinkers on this show. It's not a requirement to drink coffee, but you're a coffee drinker, so I respect and I love that. I am a latte from this place near me that I absolutely love, Peppa Joe's coffee. And so I feel like supporting, that's like one of the things I can do to support small business is buy coffee, right? That's kind of been my thing through the pandemic. Awesome. Cool. Well, tell us about who you are, what you do, and what the pandemic has been like for you. I know you're doing all these really cool things, both in business and in life. I know you just got the yoga, you're doing a yoga teacher training and everything like that. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Yeah. Oh, the pandemic has been amazingly a huge shift for me. And, I don't want to like start any blasphemous rumors. I don't want to get the conspiracy theorists all like up in arms and blame me for Corona. I didn't cause Corona, but coronavirus happened for me, right? Like I had nothing doing with it. Like, please,
Yeah.
no, don't send me angry letters. I didn't eat the bat. I didn't. There was no. I didn't create a lab. None of that. But I did. About six. I shouldn't say about 6 years ago. It was exactly 6 years ago. I was working in a corporate job. I was working for an airline. I started actually at that airline in my first year of university, when I had just come back from a little stint, a little bit of time working for Amnesty International as a peacekeeper. Came back home, and was working and was going to school for going to university, but just couldn't wrap my head around being in the same place with my feet on the ground, going to I'd just been in a war zone. I had just been like a
Yeah.
peacekeeper standing, in contested territory, seeing like these things. And then when I came back to university and was around like all these girls who were worried about what's on sale and who's dating who and who's going to this party, and I felt like an alien. And I wasn't, like I remember just driving to university and being like, am I going to be doing this exact same thing for the next 4 years so that I can finish and drive to the exact same place for the next 25 years of my
Yeah.
life?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that just didn't suit me. And so my mom actually saw an ad for a flight attendant position, a stewardess at the time, because it was, before political correctness um, kicked into that. And so I started that job when I was 19 years old. I got hired when I was 18. I
Oh,
started when I was 19. And then I went into corporate training and I, helped with some initiatives there. And it was a really great time. And I knew that there would be a time um, when that wouldn't be enough for me.
yeah.
I loved traveling around the world. I loved all the people I met. I loved the adventures I had. But 6 years ago, well, 7 years ago, 2013, I actually started my act two of life.
Hmm.
In 2013, in 2012, the world was ending, as everyone knows, right?
Yeah.
2012 the world was supposed to end for the thousandth time.
Hmm.
And I wrote my novel during that time, and I entered it into a contest in 2013, and I won the contest, and so I got the book published. And that kind of set me on this path that is now, it changed my identity, right? It
Yeah.
changed who I was and how I showed up in the world. But more importantly, it changed how I showed up, let's say, from the inside of my eyes. I mean, if anyone
Yeah.
can imagine, like, how we see ourselves internally is how the world is now going to see us. We,
Absolutely.
we,
Absolutely.
we project from the inside of our eyes what we see about ourselves. And it really did. It changed who I was in the world. And then uh, as I started marketing for that book and speaking, and I realized that there's so much more that I wanted to do, and so much more that I wanted to represent. And the publisher of the publishing company gave me a lot of instruction, gave me a lot of teaching on how to market your book, how to build a platform, how to
Mhm.
catch themes from the book. And even though the book was a fiction book, he taught me to pick out themes and start to promote those themes on Facebook. So at the time, it was women's empowerment, divine feminine,
Sure.
the goddess movement, which was in 2013 was like, not yet, hadn't yet exploded in the world.
Mhm.
But I started becoming an advocate for that movement, of that women's empowerment, really on a leading edge of it. That translated into a second book. I was raising money for women's mental health with that second book.
Mhm.
It was just at the time when a huge push towards women's issues, the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. I played in quite a few productions of the Vagina Monologues, so a lot of awareness
Mhm.
around um, what had, some of the trauma that women were having that had
Yeah.
not previously been spoken about. So I was a big advocate in that world, and a big fire starter and game changer in that world of this, new language that people were having
Mhm.
access to. And it was a beautiful time. And I actually had this idea that uh, in 6 years, I was building out my stage two. And the 6 years, I called it my 6 year plan. And I was working with a woman who was a coach, but ended up being a good friend. And as I was telling her about my 6 year plan, we were having wine and the
Mhm.
music was going and the kids were running around. And I told her about my 6 year plan. And she said, "Your what?" And I said, "My 6 year plan." "Your what?" I said, "My sexier plan." She goes, "Oh, that's what I thought you said." And I went, "All right, that sticks. It's going to be my sexier plan. When I transition out of corporate, I'm going to run this, you know, go into this creative world and my real love
Mhm.
and passion." So that became my sexier plan throughout. Well, in 2018, my daughter, who was, here I was empowering women all around the world. And my number one woman turns to me and she says, "Mama, I want to write a book with you." And I was like,
Oh,
"Oh, great. I love that
yeah.
idea." And she, but she was very specific. "I want a back cover and I want a storyboard before everything that she'd seen me. I want to, an acknowledgement page, and I want a book
Mhm.
launch party. I want exactly what she's been seeing me do now for 2 previous books.
It's fantastic.
Uh, and in 2018, we self-published that one, launched and self-published. We became bestsellers on the same day that we published it,
Nice.
and we raised $10,000 with the help of some corporate sponsors, and we raised $10,000 for autism awareness
Oh my
because my
gosh.
daughter's on the autism spectrum.
Wow.
Uh, yes, so and I saw how it changed her identity in the world. Like she
Yep.
left grade 3 as
Mhm.
this 9-year-old shy, weird, silent girl,
Yep.
autistic, and she came into grade 4 in September. We launched the book in August, so she came to school in September as no longer shy and weird and nonverbal. She now was an author, and
Yep. Yep.
not just an author, but a best-selling author.
Mhm.
And it shifted her identity, and suddenly weird became cool.
Mhm.
And suddenly nonverbal became, well, verbal in other ways. And it just allowed that shift in her for her to be able to identify every one of her weaknesses as a power. And she became very active and verbal in the advocacy of other kids who didn't have a voice and who and I
That's so awesome.
yeah, like
Wow.
talk about sexier, because now we're in the 2020, and since then I've given 2 TEDx's. I've
Mhm.
spoken on so many stages. I've raised a lot of money for autism awareness and for women's mental health. I created a huge initiative at the airline, and I'm looking to, once
Mhm.
airports are back in, called Open Skies for Autism, which is a simulation flight that kids can come to the airport and go through all the steps that a person
Yep.
would get
Yep.
on the flight,
Mhm.
and then get on a plane that taxis around the airport for half an hour. So
So
flight without ever leaving the ground. So, created all kinds of great, amazing things. And all of that was coming into 2020.
Yeah.
And so now in 2020, I feel blessed. The biggest thing, as I worked with so many women in the women's empowerment field, coaching them on finding their power and speaking their truth,
Mhm.
um, what was happening was that each and every woman were ended up writing their story, because I would coach them really in a find your story kind of way.
That's awesome.
And so the biggest thing that I was given was that I have this really fun and weird and wild, unique ability to really have people write their stories or write their book, and then we strategically position them to become bestsellers, create digital courses from it, create speeches from it, create like a whole thought leader system. And even if that book's fiction, um, bring together everything that I learned through all of my 3 books on a personal and professional level. And
Mhm.
that's what I do now is, I launched a program, an online program, and also one-on-one mentoring for, it's called the Game Changing Book Blueprint. And I take people through the whole author experience.
That's so awesome. Wow. So it's funny because you said the thing about identity.
Hmm.
And having written books, right, and knowing people who write books, and even kids who write books, right, like your daughter, which, well, wow, what a story, right? That's one of those words. Author is one of those words that can change somebody's identity,
Yeah.
right? There's something about it. Maybe it's gravitas, maybe it's just the very, very wonderful stigma that comes with that word, right? But you really allowed it to do that, right?
Yeah.
You allowed it to work its magic, and in your life and your daughter's life.
Right, right. It's amazing that you say that, because I love, we often hear that word stigma and we use it in such a negative
Yeah,
way. But it's funny, like you've just reshifted the
yeah,
paradigm around the word stigma, because there are stigmas with everything. It's sort
yeah,
of like I used to say for a long time, labels disable,
yeah.
because I never wanted to label, let's say, any of my kids. I have 2 boys and then my daughter. I never wanted to use the label and put any label on her. But
Sure.
then I came to a point of actually realizing, like, no, labels can disable, but they can also enable.
Right, right. Mhm.
And, so that paradigm shift around what do we stigmatize,
Right.
so yeah, the word author is a label.
Yeah.
It is a stigmatized word, and yet
Right.
it's a very empowering stigmatized labeled
Right,
word.
right, I'm glad you called that up because I use that word, I meant it in the most positive way possible, right?
Yeah,
Like she went from being the weird nonverbal kid, right, to
yeah.
being the cool kid,
Yeah.
right? And literally nothing had changed except she'd written a book.
Right. I get just this whole conversation. I mean, I've actually got chills because this whole conversation really has a much deeper, we're just talking about books, but it really has a much, much deeper connotation around any way that we see ourselves, like a slight shift
Yeah.
in what we have stigmatized. I mean, I just love playing in the sandbox that you just brought in there because,
Mhm.
even that word stigma, if you think of it, an astigmatism
Mhm.
is something that, people with.
I have it. Yep.
Do you?
I
Okay.
do.
I have a
Oh
great
my.
little anecdote, but just if you don't mind, tell me what is astigmatism because you have it. So,
So the way it works is, and I have it very slight, so I'm incredibly lucky it's slight, but basically it's one portion of your cornea has a different prescription than the other.
okay.
So, mine is slight enough that, it's fine. I just have a heavy prescription. I literally can't see and too far in front of me if I'm, not wearing my glasses or my contacts or whatever, right? But for some people it got pronounced. And for a long
Hmm.
time, people with astigmatism didn't get contacts. So, they had to wear these glass Coke bottle glasses, right? They're very, very thick. So that's the like layman's term for what astigmatism is.
Okay. So I love that. And I also heard that it's sort of like a kaleidoscope, like you can see
Yeah,
as you turn it, astigmatism is sort of like from one perspective you can really see clearly and then
yeah,
a slight shift, or maybe even a triangular.
yeah. Ooh, we lost her. Oh no.
So we
Hey,
just I
you're
just got a notification. Oh,
yeah,
great. Okay,
you
we're back on.
disappeared, but you're back. So
Oh,
yeah, you were saying about the kaleidoscope.
yeah, so that's what I understood, that from one perspective, it, just shifts that slight little triangle. It actually reminds me of a great little story, and I think
Mhm.
that very often these deep wisdoms come in, and I'm not the first one, right? I think there was a famous guy, um, who became really famous on the power of his parables too.
Mhm.
But and I say famous guy, I mean that could be Buddha and it
And
could be Jesus and it could be
nice.
Stephen Covey, right? Like it's like the
There's
power
everybody. Yeah.
and oh, don't get me started on the whole power of story and what we're coming back into in this
Mhm.
age because we're back to the proverbial fire,
Right.
and the age of the goddess and the storytelling tradition rather than the written word and how that changed our brain. Um, and I'd love to actually talk about that, but I'll just tell
Mhm.
this little anecdote about things that you see, and stigma and
Mhm.
how we see things. So, in this small town in Italy called Monzo, Italy, it's
Mhm.
actually really famous for the Grand Prix, but
Mhm.
lesser known, it should be famous for this story that in 1999, I believe it was, like fairly recently, the city officials of Monzo, Italy, declared and decreed this bylaw that made
Mhm.
it illegal for fish pet owners, so people who had fish as pets, little goldfish as pets,
Yeah.
made it illegal that anyone would no longer be allowed to keep their fish in a round fishbowl
Huh.
because
Interesting.
they decreed that it is inhumane to keep an animal and not have them give a true perspective of reality. because a fishbowl would make
Oh,
it like an
interesting.
astigmatism. And so
Oh,
fishbowls
wow.
were outlawed, and you can have your fish in an aquarium as long as it's
Yeah.
a flat thing. And it just made me picture like this little Joe Pesci swimming around in his fishbowl, and all he's ever seen is the world in
Is
this
the
curve.
yeah.
And now he's suddenly plopped into a flat, and he's like, "Oh, hey, 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 what happened to my reality over here?" And I mean, aren't we all going through? Like, didn't we all
Wow.
just get dropped from a fishbowl into an aquarium in
Yeah,
2020?
yeah.
Like, what happened to our reality?
And it's funny because that's such a wonderful metaphor for what exactly we're talking about, right? Because this author thing, right? You changed your reality. Your daughter changed her reality, right? We're right now in the pandemic. Our reality is different. My
Yeah.
reality today is these little boxes that I see people I love in, right?
Which is really like an aquarium.
Right, right. Thank goodness it's not round. I would not know what to do with myself.
Right?
But you're absolute wow. That's like one of those weird things. Like, you hear about those weird things that are illegal, right? Like in some states it's illegal to be facing the wrong way in an elevator and things like that, like you could get a citation for it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I love these useless tidbits of information.
yeah, I forget which state. Like, I wish I remember which state it was now, but it's true. Like, there's a state where you can't just go into an elevator and face the wrong way. You can't face the back of the elevator, and so like,
That was see, well-behaved women seldom make history. That was me. You telling me something's illegal and me going,
oh, I'm gonna do it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those funny things, but that what an interesting thing for the lawmakers in Monzo to think about.
like, you know, just how bored do you have to be as a government official to
Right,
sit there
right.
going, "Hey, yo, Luigi, what we're doing today?" I don't know, Mario. What you got? I don't know. Dogs,
What's that
chicken,
lava
cats,
thing,
fish, fish.
I mean, it's that's there must not be a lot going on in Monzo. That's all I'm gonna
Yeah,
say.
but they like run a huge Grand Prix. I mean, you'd think that keeps them occupied, but I guess there was, some humanitarians that really
Yeah,
believe that, the goldfish crisis, and mental health, should really be addressed.
yeah,
And so we are thankful for those very generous,
yeah.
empathic people.
So before the pandemic, you were on your way to doing X TEDx.
Yes.
Tell us a
Oh,
little bit
you've got a great memory, Marie. I love that.
Sound
Yeah.
like a goldfish. No, an elephant, right? Elephants are the ones that never forget.
I set that as one of my intentions. We as adults, we call those intentions and goals, right? Future
Mhm.
forecasts and predictions. Um, as kids, we really just call those wishes, right? I made a wish. I just made this crazy, wild and crazy wish, as wild as a child, that I had 2 TEDx's, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I had another one? And 2020 was really going to be that year that brought me, um, maybe not all of the 10, but I kind of had this idea that, well, if I had 2 in a very short time difference
Mhm.
between them, wouldn't it be fun if I started doing them all around the world, and brought the number up? And could I make it to 10? Because then 10 in Roman numerals is that X. So it
Right.
would be X 10X. And wouldn't that just be fun? Um, and in that fun, I did actually, previous to the pandemic, I booked quite a few. So I was on the road to that. And then, of course, pandemic put a big stop in that. Now, I know that TEDx as an organization has recouped and pivoted fairly well. I mean, it took them a few months,
Mhm.
obviously, but they did a really great job once they got the virtual
Right.
stage and decided to go that way. Um, but there was a little bit of a time that we all
Right.
needed to take at that time, not really knowing. I
Oh,
know I
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, none of us could have expected this, right? None of
Mhm.
us had talk about goals and intentions and
Right,
future
right.
setting. None of us could have predicted this.
Nobody knew. Right. And it's funny because like that's part of what I help my clients with. I didn't know if I was going to have a business. Like I was like, is that part of my business gone? Is that what's happening? Right. Do I have to think about refunding people? Do I have to think about maybe delaying payments? What's happening?
Right.
And TEDx pivoted beautifully.
Yes.
And they took time, right? Now there's a template out there, right? There's a way for people to do virtual talks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to kind of tip my hat to you and pay you a huge homage for even having that integrity and considering like, "Oh god, how do I best serve my clients?"
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate that.
and no one could have predicted it and yet that you stood back and went, "God, like do I what can I give them
Yeah,
when what we had been building doesn't exist anymore?"
right,
And
right.
so what a
And
beautiful pivot and a testament to you.
thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. So many people, but like everybody has to do that these days. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Everybody has to say what I was building, right? Like what, you were going to do 10 TEDx's.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing them virtually, that traveling doesn't exist anymore,
Right.
right? So how do you pivot? What do you do, right? We've all had to do it, and those of us who were open to doing it, I think are all the better for it.
Yeah, and you're right, they did set now a new benchmark
Yeah.
of how it's done. I actually, I'm part of Toastmasters. I've just actually, we had our contest last night. I actually won first place. Ah!
Yay!
So, yeah, and we've all had to do that virtual pivot and learning new rules and, really the ones that are like, I mean, it's Darwinism, right? At the simplest form, it's
Yeah,
Darwinism. Survival of the species, I'm not gonna say the fittest, but the ones that are, most easily adaptable.
right.
So we have a new environment now,
Mhm.
and that gives us a new platform to speak from, not necessarily just from from a stage perspective, but let's face it, video conferencing is now really here to stay. And as
Absolutely.
speakers, which your
Absolutely.
clientele largely is, we have a new opportunity to now learn some really cool and zany tricks and tips
Yeah,
to access from the stage. Like coming back and coming forward
yeah,
and making using the space and the body language and our vocal variety and our um, stage presence in a very different way. I
mhm.
know one of the things for me is I talk with my hands. This would silence me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And from a stage, we have to be larger than life because we're a small little
right.
human on a very large stage, very far away from the people at the back of the room.
Sure.
Whereas now we're contained in this little box that we're in. And so how do we use our body as an instrument to now convey a message that we have no rule book for?
Right. And what I'm finding is that, and I don't know if you found this too, but in terms of speaking, right, because now we're confined, right, we're confined to this box, it really does become all about the idea.
Yeah.
'Cause, there's no like, okay, I'm gonna rile up the crowd, right? There's none of that, right? And I'm gonna walk back and forth and be larger than life and all. And now we just have to be human, right?
Yeah.
And it's a little scary. It's a little scary.
And and let's also credit this moment and for us being alive in this moment, because this actually segues back into what I was saying I wanted to loop back into, the open loop
Yep,
I created. Let's
yep,
close that loop. Uh, on my journey of really becoming ensconced in this world of women's wisdom or women, the divine feminine and all that,
mhm,
without going too woo woo, but that whole spiritual
yeah,
religious part. I told you actually that I became a stewardess when I was still in university. I actually ended up finishing my degree in creative ways, and I have my academic background is actually in the philosophy of religion. So I've always really been really curious
Yeah.
about this. And one of the pivotal books that kind of set me on this path of thought was by a man called Leonard Shlain. And apropos of nothing, his daughter is actually a very pivotal character in the world of New Thought, where she's a New Thought leader, and he has a daughter who's married to Mel Brooks. I mean, so
Oh, wow.
just
Okay.
interesting, right? An interesting family.
Yeah.
So Leonard Shlain was a neurologist, a neurosurgeon. And one day, as he had a patient's brain open on the operating room table, he fell into like this sort of deep meditative thought, realizing that the brain had evolved differently. And he, as he was looking at the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere and the corpus callosum, like in a very scientific, technical way, he had this deep philosophical download or insight. And he went on to write this book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And the theory being is that in in matrilineal societies, in pre-written societies,
Sure.
we had an oral tradition. And the oral tradition was carried on by primarily the women storytellers, as we would sit around the fire in the women's tents, and we would carry on this oral tradition. But both men and women were equally valued as being having knowledge. And then man or humanity created the written word. And as we created the written word, suddenly the left part of our brain, the left brain hemisphere that sees things in a very linear way, that became activated. And so genetically, we started to honor that ability of people to be able to write and to be able to read, to be able to communicate in an information, in a new technology, right? This was an emerging technology. The written word was an emerging technology. The icons of something meaning something, and the people who were able to translate that, they became the new heads of the tribe, heads of the village.
Right.
That is a very, the written tradition is a masculine trait. And I don't mean that that's not accessible to women. I just mean
Right.
a masculine, feminine that both women and men have, masculine element of our brain. And slowly but surely that became honored and became prized. And so that became the survival of the fittest.
Right.
And that we are now shifting through this new advent of technology, right? So we look at, in the past, like prehistoric time, the knowledge was only given to those who were able to read and write, but that was contained in a very top sphere, top of the triangle, and keep it away. And it was only through the Gutenberg press and then Martin Luther's Reformation that said, no, let's get the access, get these printed materials out to as many people as possible. And then Martin Luther, with the Protestant Reformation, to say, like, no, the access to this knowledge doesn't just belong to the stratosphere, the upper echelons of the church. Everyone should have access to it. And that was, give or take about 530 years ago. So we're looking now at a new revolution of technology and of thought that is as critical to the pace of humanity as the printing press and the Reformation was. So we're back to the fireside chats. We're back to the, alphabet versus the goddess. Now it's goddess versus the alphabet.
It's just a different medium. It's funny. I remember in my 7th grade English teacher, I'll never forget this. I don't know. It's one of those things you don't remember. You don't know why you remember something, but you do. I'll never forget my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. Levine, said that, we were talking about how slaves in this country were illiterate, right? And they weren't taught to read and write. And she said that what you have to remember is that if you cannot read or write, you can never verify anything. because there's just, you don't know what you're signing, you don't know, you know, you have to go by what people tell you, right? So this new thing, right? Thank goodness it's available to us, right? This relatively new thing in the scope of humanity, which, you know, is thousands and thousands of years, right? But the last 500 years we read, and what a gift that we're able to do that, right? And that we're able to, you know, write books even,
Right.
and have the fireside chat and do both pretty much, you know.
Exactly. That's it. So exactly, we are now amalgamating
Mhm.
our like the way we consume information. I mean, as we both know, writing a book, I'm a huge advocate. I'm a huge reader, and but we both know people are not consuming it as a read material, as a visual material anymore. You know, we know that uh, audiobooks or you know people posting their books on YouTube or anything like that, or even you know that whole awareness around like someone who becomes a famous book author,
Mhm.
they are more likely, so more asked to speak on stages, or more likely to have their Facebook lives watched, or more likely to have, you know, be interviewed for podcasts. The whole environment has changed.
Mhm. Yeah, but to your point, right? Like I have this friend who she's, you know, three-time New York Times bestselling, you know, Wall Street Journal, this, that author, right? And has built a multi-million dollar business, you know, gets paid X, you know, five figures an hour, this, that, and the other,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
But you can say all these things about her, and then if you say, yeah, and she's an author, people are like, oh, they understand that, right? They don't get the speaking, the coaching, the consulting, this, that, you know, they get okay, she's written 3 books.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I love that. I love that. 100%. You hit it right on the head. I mean, like it's getting back to that the kind
Yeah.
of that stigma, label,
Right.
the
Right.
archetype, the identity that
Right,
comes
right,
with
exactly. You know, and people who aren't on, like, of course, you know, you and I, we could talk about the business side of that, right? And we
yeah,
could say, okay, well, she's served Fortune 500 companies, she's done this, that, the other, right? That's all incredibly valuable to us. But if I have a conversation with, let's say, my mom, who's not an entrepreneur, right? And I say, yeah, she's done, and she's going to be like, so, okay, and oh, but she's written these books. Okay, you know, now I know I
yeah,
can trust her, right? So,
yeah,
you know, it's this really beautiful access point that you give to people,
I agree.
you know, because that's something you can. There'll always be an author
Yeah.
after you do that, you know.
I think it's, you know, I think it goes back into something primal in our brain. I think that there's something visual and visceral. I kind of, you know, combined those words in my mouth there
Mhm.
for a second. Visceral and visual. That it really is archetypal. Like there's a visual of a book. It's kind of like I remember once a friend of mine actually was a very successful career woman, and then she moved into for her sort of second act of life or retirement, she moved into being a handwriting analysis
Mhm.
expert, which is a very, you know, a very narrow niche, right? I mean,
Yeah,
how many people do you know that are really handwriting analysis? And she was excellent too. She could pick out things that nobody knew about a person just from a few
right.
simple techniques of their penmanship.
Mm.
Any language too. I mean, she
Wow.
but it was very interesting because one of the things that she was saying was that if you ask children anywhere in the world to draw a house, and it doesn't matter what their own home looks like, they could be in the slums of Brazil, they can be in the you know, villas on the Nepalese mountains, they can be right. It doesn't matter where they are. If you ask them to draw a house, it will be a square and a
Yeah,
triangle
beautiful triangle on the top.
and with a chimney. Like it's they might not even have like they might not even be in an environment that requires a chimney, but it will always be a square and a triangle. And so there's something like that's this visual like archetypal, like we just recognize it as something. And I think a book does the exact same thing
Yeah.
to our brain.
Yeah.
We can hold it, we can smell it, we can anything to do with a book. It will never go kind of like out of fashion, much like a square house with a triangle roof will never go out of fashion.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
a book is archetypal within us, something we recognize what a book is. And I always say to the authors that I'm working with, it begins with a book. So whether
Mhm.
you want that online course, you cannot see the context of an online course, but you can definitely see a book that has a chapter 1, a chapter 2, a chapter 3, a chapter 4, or an act 1, an act 2, an act 3. And now how will that translate into an online course or a movie? You can have a book, you can have a concept for a movie, but guaranteed your brain is going to create it as a book.
Right.
Or even like I have lots of clients who create a book and then take that book contents and create a weekend workshop or
Mhm.
a series of speeches or anything. But it always in our brains begins with a book.
Yeah. I love that. It begins with a book. That's
Begins with a book. Yeah, I always say
yeah.
that. Begins
That's
with a
your
book.
catchphrase. If it's not already, it should be.
Yeah, you know what? I better make that. I always say that, so I better make that a bit stronger in my branding because yeah, I love alliteration. So
Yeah.
begins with book is
Exactly.
yeah.
So, what kind of people do who do you serve? Who do you love to work with? What lights you up?
Oh, okay. So I love that you just asked me that, and so permission to get a little woo woo, more
Go
woo woo.
for it.
So I definitely love what I kind of feel is the magic sauce for me is I love diving in with somebody and seeing first I just listen, I listen to them and everyone has little tells. Everyone gives little hints when they speak,
Mhm.
not just in the things that they say, those are really important, but even more so the things that they don't say.
Sure.
And in those pauses is where I really love to kind of hone in and find out what's really going on there because it's usually in those pauses and the things that you are keeping in the shadows, the things that you haven't found yet, that's where the gold lies.
Mhm.
And so I love working with conscious entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
That word conscious will probably keep coming up because that is really my ideal
Yeah.
client are whether they be conscious entrepreneurs, conscious thought leaders, people who are writing. I love working both in fiction and nonfiction, but always for a greater purpose. And then I love also being able to see every author that I've ever worked with has gone on to create bigger things, bigger platforms, be-
Mhm.
beginning with a book. So whether that be huge level weekend workshops, whether that be events, whether that be plays, a lot of those things always on a conscious level. And then the extra step that I love is also pairing them with not for profit and then corporate sponsorship, so sort of like the idea of creating a, a, a self perpetuating loop of like getting so many people involved in your mission and in your awareness and bringing that book. We always say, right, it's not about profiting from the book
Mhm.
but having so much impact in the world
Yeah.
that the message of that book, the impact that you're making creates profit. So
Right. Because the truth is, so few people get rich off of a book, right?
right.
You have to be, J.J. Abrams or somebody, you know what I mean? You have to write the next Harry. I don't like J.K. Rowling, but you have to write the next Harry Potter,
And
right?
everyone says that. They always use J.K. Rowling as an example for someone
Yeah.
who sort of got rich off of her books. But you know what? She actually didn't profit from the books. She profited from the books becoming movies and the merchandise deal that came
Right.
with it.
Right. So it's the same exact thing, right? The book, even from a business perspective, right? The book, look, I have books on Amazon. I'm lucky if I make $50 a year,
Mhm.
but people come to me because they know I have a book. And so I built this business off of it, right?
Right.
So it's the same exact thing. It's what you do after. It's, do you speak? Do you have your online course? Do you consult? What is it that you do after the book, whether it's fiction, nonfiction? So I think that's actually a very smart business model, because a lot of these book coaches, right? They get you through the book, they get you the bestseller, little orange thing, right? And then what?
Right.
It's like, okay, well, I have it. Great. And then you're kind of just sitting there and refreshing the Amazon sales page.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought this up because, as you
Yeah.
know, like you and I share this, it's all about integrity. It's all about being transparent. It's all about,
Mhm.
and that's the one thing. I have so many authors that come to me going, like, and they're a little bit hesitant and they're resisting because they're like once bitten, twice shy, and they're looking
Yep.
and they're going, gosh, like I signed on with this one person, and I know it's always the exact, like they begin it with the same shame and kind of like it's almost like they're in a confessional booth.
Yeah.
Signed on with one person, and now I've got a garage full of 10,000 books. Yes, I've got Amazon bestseller, but I paid through the nose for it, right? I took out a loan. I took out I've kind of put a second mortgage. All these things that
Yeah.
are happening in that world, and I'm it's like there's a healing around that, and I'm very much very committed to never having another author feel disempowered from having their
Yeah.
book come out, because I see the power, as we're
Yeah.
talking about the stigma, the label, the identity, the shift,
Yeah.
the
And
paradigm shift that comes with writing a book.
what you're saying is not an exaggeration, because I mean, I just got an email from one of these like book, we'll get you the New York Times bestseller, Amazon, New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestseller. They almost guarantee it, and they're raising their prices from $36,000 to $40,000.
Yeah.
You're not kidding. I don't know many people with $40,000 just sitting around,
Yeah.
right? You have to put that on a credit card. You have to,
Yeah.
take out a mortgage, take out a loan, right? It's an investment in your business.
Right.
And that's a very significant, I mean, for what? And then what?
Right.
But
Right.
and then what, right? So
Right.
what I love about your model is that you're giving people the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to spend anywhere, even if it's half that or a quarter of that, or I don't know what your prices are, right? But if you're
Yeah.
going to be spending that, you had better have a next step, you know what I
Right.
mean? Or if it's worth it, to spend $40,000 if there's the system behind it.
Yeah, and funny, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I have seen, and I've actually, I've been, and I'm not sort of telling secrets, telling tales out of school. I remember being like an
Yeah.
industry insider. I remember being at one of Brendan Burchard's events where I mean, it wasn't a small closed room that he would not appreciate that I'm telling the story. It was to a huge
Mhm.
auditorium filled at his event, and he talked straight out, very transparently about how he had used one of these systems to buy his New York Times bestseller status, and that while the New York Times bestseller status gave him a lot of gave him a lot of credibility and allowed him to kind of become more notable
Yeah.
in his field. However, he acknowledged fully well that had he not already had a business in place that was worth that investment,
Yeah.
then he would be out of money, and like that it is not an investment that has a return on investment by
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he acknowledged it took
Yeah.
him a lot of money to become a New York Times bestseller.
Oh, yeah.
I would not recommend anyone who doesn't have that kind of cash flow to venture on that.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you do have that kind of cash flow, it means you've already built something up enough that it can warrant it. So
That
sort of like let's either get you up there to build a
right.
platform that's high enough,
Right.
right? Or let's start
Yeah.
to build that out, right?
Yeah,
Let's start
no.
people getting to know your message.
I agree with you. I mean, I work with people all the time that they just don't have, like the majority of what I do every day is social media,
Right.
right? And it's the same concept because we could post until we're blue in the face and nobody will come if you don't have the thing in place,
Right.
right? So we could talk about what you do, we could talk about your expertise, but if you don't have the business to back it up, nobody will buy from you.
Right.
Right. And it's the same exact thing, except perhaps on a much grander scale.
Yeah.
So how do
Yeah.
people get in touch with you?
Well, and just I wanted to let people get in
Mhm.
touch with me. I don't want to skip over that, but I also just want to say in all of this talk, and I love talking with you because we're both people who are in the business. Yeah, I do. I do. In the business. And so we can talk about sort of like these strategic points around the business of writing a book. But I do want to, as we end off, I want to ensure that the final thing that people are left with, like the little, chocolate on the coffee, like so it's not just the bitter, like the bitter
Yeah.
reality of the business of the coffee, but it's that little chocolate that can melt on their tongue. Is that in the final analysis, in the final, as the final thought, the biggest thing that we don't want to lose sight of is when someone picks up your book and reads it, they are like you are letting them into your world. You're becoming friends with them. It's an
Mhm.
experience, it's a relationship. You're building a relationship with your book. When I read a book,
Yeah.
like, if you think of some of the favorite books that you've read through your life,
Mhm.
they become your favorite and you actually fall in love with the author a little bit.
Yep.
And
Characters and the situation and yeah.
yeah, so forget the whole, business and the money and anything like that. Let's not lose sight that that's actually what we're working on when we're building a book, when we're writing a book,
Yeah.
is that is the relationship that you're building with your reader, and keeping that sacred,
Mhm.
because all the money and all the business and all the building doesn't matter. It doesn't. We don't give a hoot unless, like, without it being that heart to heart connection, and that availability and that vulnerability to
Mhm.
share a part of your story, whether you've fictionalized it or told a part of your story, that you are actually creating a relationship. You're on a date. You're
Yep.
engaged. You're on a honeymoon. You're in that person's life. You're married to them, or in a intimate relationship with them for the time that they're reading that book. So let's
Yeah.
not forget that and lose
Yeah.
sight, right?
It's so
And
true. Or like there are books that I've read that I can still see those characters
yeah,
at a moment's notice.
right,
There or I can remember the advice in the book, right? So
right, right.
you're absolutely right. I love that, and I love that you approach the business from that because that's what matters. I mean, you can help somebody write a book and put the system in place, but if it's not a good book at the end of the day,
Yeah,
who cares?
right, right. And that could be, I mean, that could be, as sort of touchy-feely as like an Eat, Pray, Love, or it could be a neurosurgeon like Leonard Shlain that I
Yeah,
geek out on and Google his name to see who his daughter is, right? It just, people fall in love with the book, with an author of a
absolutely.
book. So let's not lose sight of that. Yes, so people are more than welcome to come to meravrichter.com to find me. And actually, if you go to meravrichter.com, there's actually, you can go to meravrichter.com/6AA, because I take people through a 6 author archetype assessment, because we all, in today's world, an author needs to be all of these archetypes.
Mhm.
And assessing which one you are today really has us build out and see where your strength lies and how, because every author, right, we're going to pull that golden thread, that wisdom and that
Mhm.
genius out of you, so that, because it's it's a different kind of book that will come out from the creator, the storyteller, the writer, the
Yeah.
publisher, the promoter, or the authority archetype. So that's actually, I invite people to do that. I'm very happy to connect with them, and then yeah, I'm love to build a relationship. I'm also Merav Richter on basically every social media channel that exists. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I knew it would be because we of course we know each other from TFL and entrepreneurship land and everything like that. So I really appreciate you for being here, and for those of you who are looking for a book to become an author, to take the wonderful stigma of being an author, Murav's the person to do it for sure.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's such a pleasure, as always, having a conversation with you, and I look forward to many, many more.
Yay! I'll see you soon.